So welcome everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here today with Helma Lutz and Karin. Oh my goodness, Schwiter, is it correct? I didn't ask you before about the pronunciation.
Very good.
And this is the first online seminar of this year, of 2025. And it's really a pleasure to start presenting this book, Home Care for Sale, the transnational brokering of senior care in Europe. We dealt with care in many different ways throughout the years. And for sure, we are aware that senior care is definitely the big challenge that we have to face in order to protect the rights of people to have a full and satisfactory life from now on. Certainly, the pandemic has shown us how challenging is to provide senior care in Europe, despite, of course, the differences among different countries. So we're really, really happy to start discussing about this topic. As you can see, the presentation is recorded and then will be shared on our YouTube channel in the playlist books. So Helma and Karin, I really welcome you again and I give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Marcella. This is really a wonderful way to start the new year with the presentation of our book. This book is the outcome of one of the outcomes of our joint research projects, Decent Care Work, which we carried out between 2017 and 21. So the book Home Care for Sale talks about the rapid economization of care work for the elderly, which is provided more and more by migrant women. In our case, migrant women from Central and Eastern Europe. This book is an edited collection, so two of our co-editors cannot be there today, as you heard. Unfortunately, but I think the two of us can give you insight in what we have been doing in this book. So this edited collection is looking at the profound changes that are happening in senior care, in home care provision in particular in all of Europe. What we see is that there are new waves of commodification, marketization, and corporations of care. In particular, in this book, we focus on the phenomenon that there is a rise of transnational agencies which broker home care workers within Europe. And within Europe means that the Western European and also the Southern European countries are the countries that are in need of care, and broker care workers are going from Central and Eastern Europe to Western and Southern Europe. The brokers, they are in particular, their clients are middle class and upper class households, and the brokering is promising affordable and appropriate home care for seniors according to their individual needs. So what we have tried to do in the book is show that yes, this phenomenon is not new. We already have also a lot of insights in countries like the USA who are getting care workers from Asia, from all parts of the world. But the interesting thing in our case is that the care workers, the migrant care workers, in particular women, are in the majority. They are not from the global south, but they are from Eastern and Central Europe. So what do we do in the book? Karin, can you move to the next slide, please? Okay, this book has 4 parts. We first look at the new markets and the market conditions, and in particular the role of the brokering agencies. We see that there is a lot of new players. It's a big market and a lot of new players in the market. And of course, the agencies try to shape this kind of work in their own interest. Powerful players are trying to influence also the public, the policies in the countries, and we see that there a whole new market economy in the welfare states is rising. So the part 2 is dealing with the question of transnationality, mobilities, and border regimes. The border regimes come into sight in particular when we talk about COVID. We did see, I mean, that it had an important impact on the border regimes, and it is interesting also to look at what happened during the COVID time and what happened after COVID was over. In part 3 of the book, we look at the household of a workplace, because the migrant women we are talking about are working and living in the same household, which means that the boundaries between working and living are blurred. Part 4 is in particular zooming in on the question of labor rights, on fair care initiative, and the question of labor organizing. So the question here is, I mean, are there initiatives who are trying to improve the working conditions, in particular of the migrant workers, and then there's a conclusion. So I go quickly to part number 1. Karin, can you move? Yeah, thank you. So again, you see that we have tried to be really broad in including the work of people in many researchers in many European countries, from Austria, Belgium, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Czech Republic, from Croatia, from England, also from the Philippines, which is of course outside of Europe, but in the Greek case this plays a role. Then Germany, Greece, Hungary, Ireland, Italy, Netherlands, Poland, Philippines, Romania, Serbia, Slovakia, and so forth. So, in particular, what we have been looking at is common patterns that we find in this brokering industry. Some are established businesses, others are much more, even single persons are establishing a business like this. We have also been looking, and this is also the common pattern, looking at the migration regimes and the welfare and the gender regimes, and then looked at what do the policies and regulations of the brokering agencies, what where are they going, and who is and or who are the most influential actors in the care and the value chain. Next slide, please. So, well, we started with what we called most similar and most different cases of brokerage. What we see overall is that there are new modes of brokerage and new modes of employment arrangements, which means that many of the women are either self-employed or they are working as posted workers, and there are also different other forms. In most of the cases, there are lots of questions. They are underpaid, and there are quite problematic employment arrangements. The common rationale is that countries recruit the workforce from poorer countries and regions, which then result in care drain on the side of the migrant families and care gains on the side of the families that employ a migrant worker. And then also there is as I already said, a contestation of the new mode of senior care provision, like NGOs, for instance, in particular. Karin will talk about this in Switzerland, are very active, and a couple of NGOs are really working on the improvement of the working conditions. This is a contested terrain. The question of trans, inter, and supranational level play an important role here. Next slide, please. Okay, in part one of the book, what I already said, we start with the new markets we try to explain how these new modes of care provision have emerged, and also what do the politics of the receiving states, what do they have to do with this? What are their welfare regimes? And what is also taking place quite independent from social policies. What we see in Europe, as I already said, is this European pattern of circular east-west migration, which means that many migrant carers live for 4 weeks to 3 months in the home of the person they care for, then return to their own household in the place of origin, and they are and somebody else is taking over the care for the person, and so there is a new unique pattern that we do not see in other parts of the world, but this has been somehow institutionalized over the last 20 years. Next slide, please. Okay, the migration brokerage, as we can show, has it has become an established part of the transnational care and value chains. Eva Palenga very well in her article, you can see how this works. There are always 2 agencies, one in the country of origin and one in the receiving country, and in the way they work together, it's usually the case that the agency in the country of like in the German country, for instance, is the institution where the families and the persons in need of care are dealing with, and in particular in Germany, the Polish part is sending and recruiting and sending the migrant workers. I already said that brokering agencies became powerful players in this new market. Of course, it's a huge business. It's influencing working conditions, state policies, and is also that there is a very small part in which there are non-profit enterprises, but this is really very small. Next slide, please. Karin?
This is the next slide?
Yes. This is part 2, right. Thank you. Okay. Yes, care mobility, the question of what care mobility means has become an important geopolitical resource for transit countries. And what we can see also from our research is that the majority of the women working in this sector are well educated, but they cannot find work in their home countries. So we see a de-skilling of national labor on one part, and which is and the migration means that they are also de-skilled because they are not really able to work in what they have been learning. The presence of agencies, and that's one of the outcomes in the transnational economy of care, aggravates care extractivism from and within Central and Eastern European countries. Next slide, please. Can you put the next slide, please, Karin?
It is already the next slide on my side.
Okay, yeah, this is it. Yeah. Yes, we already mentioned the COVID pandemic that showed us how fragile this whole system is. And the system is depending on transnational mobility regimes, and we did see how during the COVID time, I mean, this just broke down, at least in the beginning, and every country, all countries in Europe mostly shut their doors, but there were ways of finally ways were found so that people, migrants, could come into the households of the care receivers, but it was very complicated. Another part of the transnational mobility regimes is that their social media and digital platforms are becoming very important, also as a new way of brokerage. And yes, Karin will speak later on about grassroots activism for better working conditions. But what we see also in many countries in Europe is an increasing formalization of the live-in sector, which brokers, of course, try to push. But that does not automatically mean that the working conditions are improved or what we sometimes see is that that even may have an opposite effect. Okay, Karin, I think I'm done with my parts. Yes, and this is part 3.
Thank you. So part 3, we zoom in from this like transnational level to the local level of the household. And in this part, the chapters show that the private household is the key location of where so much caring activities take place. But it is often a very, very neglected workplace. And how this work takes place is controversial. And in the live-in care system, we can say that basically the care workers being mobile allows the care recipients to keep their households, to stay and continue to live in their own households. And that means that the care worker, they live in a household of someone else. And this creates quite a few tensions. The chapters in this section 3 of the book show that a key problem is that agencies often promise live-ins will be available 24 hours a day. It's clear that this is not possible to have a worker work 24 hours, but very often it is the expectations of the household that the care worker is present around the clock or is permanently on call. And that is one key issue that creates a lot of disagreements and requires a lot of negotiation in the household. For the worker, this means the distinction between work and leisure time blurs, and it's very hard for workers to actually claim time off, to actually leave the household, have time for themselves, or even if they stay at home, to kind of distance themselves from the work and recover. That's why after a few weeks of work, workers told us that they're often extremely exhausted because even though their contracts might stipulate working hours, this does not translate to actually having time off in practice. Then in part 4, the book focuses on labor rights, fair care initiatives, and labor organizing. The first chapters of this section, they show how hard it is for workers in the live-in care sector to organize. This is because the power relationships between employers and workers are very unequal. So it's very hard for workers to negotiate better conditions. For instance, there are agencies that offer care workers to be replaced at any time if the household is not happy. But on the other hand, they don't offer it to the workers that they can choose a new household, you know, if they're not happy with their employer. So the situation is very unequal and it makes it hard to negotiate for the workers. Second, live-in care workers don't have a factory or an office as a workplace where they could meet other live-in care workers. Very often it's one care worker in one household with very little free time to actually meet others. And this isolation means it's also hard to form a group to organize. Nevertheless, and this is 2 more chapters in this part of the book, there are some initiatives where care workers have managed to organize. One example in the book is from the city of Basel, where they have organized usually meeting after a Polish church service on Sundays that gave them the opportunity to get out of the house and then meet other care workers. And one of the chapters describes very nicely how these meeting places and also also online practices of solidarity and networks that emerged from this supported care workers. So it gave them more knowledge about their labor rights and encouraged them to negotiate with their employers and better their situation. So it provided a valuable peer support. And in the last chapter of this section, we have a closer look at a fair care initiative, also in Switzerland, that tries to provide live-in care with decent conditions. And we looked at how do they try to do this and what is different in that Fair Care initiative. And we could show that one key issue is that they are very distinctly recording working hours, and they force the household to bring in additional care personnel or take over care themselves during the time when the care worker has time off. Because only if someone else is responsible for a frail elder person, the worker can really take time off and take their breaks, days off, and leave the household. Overall, we must say that these organizing efforts are very punctual, are very small. And if we look at the whole sector overall, we do have to say that most live-in care shops would not actually provide what we would call decent working conditions. Now, the book has one concluding chapter by Ito Peng that tries to kind of place the European live-in labor market in a larger kind of global supply chain debate. And that chapter argues that this brokerage industry has become ever stronger, and in this industry, labor is basically a commodity that can be moved across the globe. And the chapter argues that it's important to shift our lens not just on the micro level of the household, but also look at meso and macro level perspective of these brokers and also of the policies and economies that allows this brokerage to work in that way. And it argues that this brokering is a byproduct of the EU's commitment to social care expansion. And at the same time, it's also a product of the state retreat from actually providing this care, but states have become to rely on the market to provide these services. And the brokering agencies, they kind of fill this gap, and they respond to the demand for low-cost public care by taking advantage of these socio-economic inequalities within Europe and also in other parts of the world, and that they have become very apt at evading or circumventing existing regulations. Now, looking at the book as a whole, to conclude, we see these brokering agencies as filling the gap created by the state that does not provide the care. So it is also produced by state policies that leave families with the difficulty of caring for their relatives. There are some attempts at regulating the brokering industry in different countries across Europe, but overall we have to say there still is very little regulation. And agencies often operate in a kind of gray zone. Also, the missing oversight over the household as a workplace allows them to evade or bypass or just ignore existing regulations. The specific spatial arrangement of live-in care work, where the workplace and the living place of the worker are in the same household, also makes it very difficult to regulate, and makes it very difficult to also ensure that these regulations are upheld in practice. And also, in absence of effective regulation, we have across Europe more and more critique or counter movements emerging. This is not just kind of the small scale solidarity networks of the workers themselves, but also larger organizations of care workers, trade unions, or NGOs that put more and more pressure on European governments to improve working conditions in these sectors. So, last slide, in what sense, what is specific about this European case that we focus on in our book? We mentioned quite a few things already. So instead of kind of a south-north migration that we see in other places that sometimes stretches across continents, like Filipino workers in Canada, Europe has quite an intra-regional migration from east to west within Europe. And probably compared to some other world regions, we have quite widespread and active counter movements, so that the whole live-in care arrangement is highly contested in quite a few European countries, and there is pressure for more regulation. Furthermore, also compared to other places, live-in home care is probably somewhat more embedded in welfare state regulations and long-term care policies. For instance, cash for care regimes, or also specific live-in care regimes, as we know it, for instance, in Austria. But these welfare policies, they follow kind of what we would call a new economic governance logic that has become pervasive within the EU, that leads to a commodification of healthcare. So instead of the state or public institutions providing care, it is outsourced to the market, which leads to the emergence of this brokering industry. But still, the EU shares kind of this common sense that they want to ensure decent work, decent labor, and also decent care. And so there is these attempts at better regulating the markets that are present in many different countries and also on the European level. Thank you very much for your interest. We're looking forward to your comments and later also to the questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karin. And thank you, Helma, of course, for introducing us to this very important book. In the meantime, I wrote in the chat, I put the link to the book and some reviews as well, so everybody can also know more just following the links. But first of all, I would like to give now voice to one of your contributors. So to Lucia Morosi, a member of Minerva Lab, who's kindly accepted to work as a sort of internal discussion from many different point of views then.
Yeah.
So Lucia, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Marcella. Thank you, Helma and Karin, for your very detailed and clear presentation of the book. I have some comments and basically trying to highlight the point of strength of this book, and also some questions, also to stimulate the debate, but I try to be go quick. First thing I think is that this book is really, really clear in showing how care transformations in terms of care corporatization and care marketization, and even more, care corporatization is actually a common trend impacting on different contexts, while giving also the contextual nature of this process in different contexts, which is something very important, I think. For instance, doing research on this topic in the context of Italy, in my case, I think that research like this one and book like this one may really help to understand also what happens in a very contextual, smaller context, having as a broader framework. And this also shows basically the embedded nature of social reproduction in production, quoting Nancy Fraser's idea of contradiction of capital and care, because basically we can say that nowadays care corporatization is structurally linked to the neoliberal phase of capitalism, of course. the book show how different levels interact when dealing with this phenomenon, the macro, the meso, and the micro, and helping also to connect different perspectives. We have a lot of research dealing with these topics on the macro level of the care economy, the macro level of the organization of welfare states, but also other research focusing on workers' perspective, for instance, while this book linked together all these perspectives. And it also has an intersectional dimension, I mean, and because the same organization of care in under the processes of care corporatization is intersectional, as you show in your presentation, and as it clearly emerged from the book. We have the intersection among different regimes, the welfare regime, the employment regime, the immigration regime, and so one thing I really want to know more about is how you define care extractivism, not only within among European states, like Eastern European state, which is the country of origin of these women who came to Western European, Northern European country to work, but also how this process of this dynamic of care extractivism is given within single context in terms of value extraction from the very organization of care in different contexts. As I was saying, the intersectional approach, I think you didn't mention it in your presentation, but it clearly emerged from the book, from the structure of the book, from the theoretical structure of the book. And for instance, when we talk about households as workplaces, the intersectional dimension helps to shed light on what really happens within households. So what it helps to make visible what is often invisible. And also, when you talk about the formalization of employment relations, which not always implied an amelioration of working conditions for workers, no? Also in these terms, the intersectional approach helps us to shed light on these complex dynamics. And so I really want to know how did you deal with the intersectional approach in thinking about the very structure of the book? Because I really appreciate when the intersectionality is adopted as a perspective rather than as a specific topic. I think this is what we really need. And to conclude, this is maybe more a comment and question for Karin. As for alliances and workers' agency, also in this case, we can start from the idea of intersectionality into practice as defined by Sabrina Marchetti and Daniela Cherubini in their book Global Domestic Workers. No? They explain how positive efforts to organize domestic workers rely on this idea of intersectionality, also in intersectional struggles and alliances. But what I really want to know, you mentioned, Karin, grassroots movement, workers self-organizing, but what I think is that this care workers form of collectivization somehow challenge the traditional forms of trade unionism. And I also think that within an overall economy where the extraction of values from social reproduction activities, from welfare, from care, make somehow these workers a kind of vanguard for the organizations also of other workers. So what do you think about if you can give us more information about the interaction between workers self-organizing groups or NGO efforts to ameliorate the condition of the workers and the very role of trade unions? Because, I mean, when we talk about concrete amelioration of working conditions for these workers, we are talking about trade unions work, basically. Yeah, I think it's all, and then I will leave room for other questions. Really, really thank you.
Many thanks, Lucia. Thank you for this very insightful starting of our discussion. As I ask also in the chat, please, if you have any question, just either raise your hand or write the question in the chat. In the meantime, I will give the floor to Helma and Karin to react to Lucia's comments.
Yeah, maybe I start. Thank you, Lucia. These were fantastic questions, really great, absolutely to the point. You started, your first question was about care extractivism. What actually we mean by that is that, well, the majority of the migrant workers are women. The majority of the migrant workers has families which stays behind in the countries of origin, and the majority of the workers has children of their own. And then, of course, the question is, who takes care of the children while they are gone? What we have seen is that in many countries, Eastern European countries, the reaction to the women's migration to Western households was very positive in the beginning, but that changed during the 90s, in the end of the 90s. There was in many countries, and still is, a debate about so-called Euro orphans, meaning that these, in particular, the mothers are bad mothers. They are leaving their children behind, and children who do not have the mother to take care of them cannot do well. So this is, and in my own work, I've also looked at, what are fathers doing, and I did work together with Eva Palenga-Molenbeek, and we found out that in the majority of cases, the grandmothers take over and not the fathers. So, I mean, there's a lot to say about the gender regime in the countries of where the migrant women come from. So in that sense, I would say yes. I mean, it is care extractivism. The politics. I mean, this debate is still going on in Poland for a long time. It was also in Ukraine. But what I can see from the development is that as a reaction to this debate, women try to stay with their children as long as possible, and go and they take this job as a care worker in Germany when the children somehow, when they have a good, well, displacement, a replacement, and but also as a reaction to the Euro Orphan campaign, they try to go when the children are out of the household. So which means that we now have women at the age of between 50 and 70, even over 70, who are taking care of family members who are almost the same age as they are. So, I mean, this is, and this, I would say, yes, this is care extractivism in, well, the European way. And this is something that we have definitely to discuss what kind of, political well, ideas are connected to that. Just very shortly on the intersectional approach. Yes, I think you are absolutely right. And of course, there is great work already been done also in Italy on the household at the workplace. And and I think you are absolutely right, Lucia, in saying, you know, this asks for an intersectional approach. The intersectional approach is, well, the three main categories are race, gender, gender and class. And on the class question, one can say that the women are usually have seen a good education. So it's not that working class people are doing this kind of work. It's rather people who do have education. On the question of race, this is also quite interesting question, which is we do not talk about that much in this book, but I have been doing research on that, looking at the way, in particular in Germany, where Polish, going back to the to National Socialism, and the way the Polish men and women were considered well, workers and not intellectuals. So the intellectuals was killed. That was one of the first acts that Hitler did when Poland was when the German army went to Poland. And what we see in, or what we hear in some of the interviews, is that the people who are now receiving care is this older generation who do still consider them somehow as a servant caste. And in that way, it is quite interesting to look at this phenomenon. Some of the workers told us about this, that how they treat, how the person they are caring for is treating them. And here you can see, obviously, well, you know, somehow the history also of the European history and the traces of the Second World War. So in that case, I would say, I mean, we still have to do much more work about this, and it's something that is rather not talked about also in the research we are doing. But I think it's quite important to go that way. And now I give to Karin.
Yes, on the question about worker agency, I completely agree that this challenges traditional form of labor organizing. And we can see it in that chapter we have in the book with the Basel case, that the group of care workers was from very early on supported by a labor union. They provided kind of background organizing help and also knowledge on labor rights. They did kind of education sessions, etc. And they realized that it was a huge challenge for that union, because what care workers needed often went beyond I negotiate a labor contract or like judicial support or something, but say their family ended their contracts very suddenly. They were stranded in Switzerland with nowhere to sleep, right? So they needed a place to sleep or some emergency help, or also kind of the specific situation of living and working at the same place provided challenges that are usually not answered by labor unions. And I think there is, not just with living care, but there is a larger debate among labor organizing scholars that are saying labor organizing must kind of extend their vision beyond the workplace, beyond the factory doors, it is often argued, and kind of include the whole life of people. And that can be dependence in other countries, migration histories. Actually, yeah, if you're in another country, you might need a place to sleep. And I think live-in care worker agency kind of fosters that debate and fuels it and shows how important it is that labor organizing cannot narrowly focus on labor conditions at the workplace, but has to include kind of all these other dimensions. And I think there is already a lot of work also in other sectors going on in that direction that we fuel into.
Thank you so much, Helma and Karin. In the meantime, Erika Loy, that cannot take the floor because she cannot open the microphone, but she's asking whether during your research you found out that the country of origin makes any difference in relation to bargaining practices, unionization, and any other form or network among care workers. And I also added more for our students than for you, but still I would like to have a comment from you. I put in a note in the chat some recommendations of the European Union Care Strategy. And I also put the link to the policy brief for the students to read these recommendations in full. But the four that I just put on the floor concern addressing the challenges of vulnerable groups of workers, like the one that you have addressed in your book, tackle skills and labor shortages with education, training, and legal migration pathways. And it makes me laugh because in the meantime, all governments in our in our countries are going exactly in the opposite direction. So they're not listening at all about these recommendations. We are even dealing with people, I don't want to mention the names, that speak about re-immigration. And since you have Austria and Germany editors in your group, you know what I have in mind. But even in our case, we could add many comments about this. And anyway, so third point, support informal carers, including, once again, training, even psychological and financial support. And last but not least, improve fiscal sustainability by ensuring cost effectiveness of long-term care instead of dismantling it, as practically we are already doing. So any comment is welcome on this very important recommendation at UE level, plus, of course, the question by Erika.
Maybe I start and then Karin takes over. Yes, I mean Erika's question is very important and interesting. But also, I mean, as a comment to what Karin was just talking about, we have huge differences in the level of organization between our countries. I mean, the Basel case, the Swiss case is very different from the German case. We do not have any kind of union that is uniting the care workers. They sit, I mean, they live quite isolated in households and have very little possibility to go to a meeting. I mean, what Karin said is also true for Germany, that in particular the women from Poland, they try to go to the services of the church on Sundays, but often they don't even get that time to go there. So what they do is they have Facebook groups or other kinds of groups, and usually when they have a problem, they do ask their the people who are on this who are in this work. So they find like friends and or supervisors or whatever among themselves. So the strategies for unionization, in particular in Germany, are close to zero. There is a union that helps when they are really under pressure and when they have big problems. But unionization in a form what we think, that people go to the street and they ask for the rights, is not happening in Germany up to this point. And I think, well, I do hope that in the future, for instance, we have a new Polish government now, so we hope that that government is more open for helping these workers. At the same time, 1/3 of the Polish population, men and women, are not in the country, but they are working outside of the country. So unionization is very complicated when people are migrants and moving between countries. I think that's that I can say about the case of Germany. Yeah, I mean, the EU strategy, Marcella, you already said, I mean, at some points you're laughing because, yes, I mean, there are so many signs that things go into the opposite direction. Our government that gave up now, they promised that they would come up with formalization of the work that also covers the possibility that the migrant workers are supported. They haven't done anything. So with the next the next government coming up, I'm quite sure nothing will happen. So I'm more, I mean, Karin is more positive, and I think she has more positive examples also in her country than we have in Germany at the moment. I'm very sorry for that.
Yes, I'd like to say also a few words about, does it matter where they come from regarding their agency? And I think in some ways it does. It's in Switzerland, it's particularly been the Polish community that has been kind of knitting these networks and supporting each other. And we have done interviews with agencies that says we don't hire Polish women anymore, they're too difficult. In the sense they have become difficult because they know their labor rights, they know what is what works and what not. And we're seeing that kind of the global care chains also within Europe are stretching wider and wider as agencies are trying to recruit new, even more vulnerable people. We see this particularly in the case with the Polish contracts, that some of the workers coming with Polish contracts into Western Europe are not actually originally from Poland, but it's people from Ukraine, from Belarus, and so of these countries farther east that then come with a Polish workers permit into Western Europe. So the chains, they stretch longer, and this also shows that this is not kind of a sustainable business. If we ever have to recruit more vulnerable people from even farther away, because the ones who kind of realize their labor rights are no longer willing to work under these conditions, it does not hold. So, and in that sense, I think it does make a difference also to how they dare resist exploitative conditions or also organize. And with regard to the recommendations, it's indeed the case that this is quite, I mean, we have a general tendency of governments at the moment that are rather not pro-migration, but there are different cases. So in Switzerland, for instance, we currently have a bill on live-in care coming from the government that is in discussion at the moment that makes very clear regulations on the hours a live-in care worker can work, when they have to have time off, how much they have to be paid when they're on call, so kind of making it more clear. And we expect that this might actually pass because it has been negotiated between the agencies and the unions. So it has quite a wide support. So I think some improvements in some countries are possible. It's not kind of a bleak picture overall in Europe. But I think within our project, we would agree that the live-in care cannot be the solution for the care crises in Europe. But I mean, if we're looking for solutions within live-in care work, it can mean kind of slight improvements to the conditions of work of specific people, but it does not solve the problem that a live-in arrangement is very, very difficult and prone to kind of extended working hours. So we would see the solution rather in how states provide care, care facilities, or rather than having live-in workers as being the solution.
Thank you, Karin. In the meantime, Erika was, well, first of all, thanking both of you for your answers. I give her voice because, as I told you, she cannot open the microphone. But at the same time, we have just few minutes, so it's really just a quick comment. She was also mentioning the issue, of course, of the minimum wage. So she was wondering whether, at least in Switzerland, at this point we should say, at least in Switzerland, there is a debate, or there is even already a regulation about the minimum wage for the live-in carer. And I would like to add, because I'm not so familiar really with the legislation in Switzerland, when you say that there is a regulation and the debate and so on, does it imply that it's a federal regulation, so it applies to all the country, or just to the German-speaking part, for example, or the French-speaking part of the country and so on? Because unfortunately, you are very different, not only linguistic, from a linguistic point of view, but also in terms of, let's say, patriarchal culture, let's say like that.
Mm-hmm. So good and bad news. It applies to the whole of Switzerland if that passes, yes, but it does not apply to all care workers. It only applies to posted care workers, so where the agency is the formal employer. It does not apply to any direct hires. Right?
I see.
Direct hires, they're still exempt from labor law, and there is a lot of campaigning to change this, because at the moment it's kind of two completely different regulations for kind of the same type of work, depending on who is your formal employer. But for the time being, it only if it involves an agency that has the responsibility of being your employer, that it applies.
Thank you so much. Well, this helps me to understand, and hopefully also the others. Well, as I said, unfortunately, time is over. As we said, we have a strict rule that after 60 minutes, we stop our meetings. So this makes also more feasible for those who will listen to us on YouTube to listen to all the conversations that we had. So I thanks really Lucia for being the discussant.
Thank you all.
On behalf of all of us. And thanks Helma and Karin. I really look forward to read the book. Unfortunately, I didn't yet, but I will certainly do. And please come and visit us whenever you want for any further development of your work, or even just for attending other event. All our events, as you know, are online, so, and are already present, or anyway, you find them on our website, and really come and join us whenever you want. You are most welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank
Have
you,
a nice
Helma,
evening.
Karin. Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.